Hello everybody, welcome to this information session from the Department of Education at the Archdiocese of Liverpool for all staff in our Catholic schools concerning the proposed academization consultation and strategy that is currently taking place. We're very glad that you could join us, but before we begin, it probably would help if we actually introduced ourselves and said who we are. My name is Joan McCarthy and I'm Director of Education for the Archdiocese, ably assisted by...
I'm Chris Williams, I'm the Deputy Director of Education for the Archdiocese.
Okay, so you've probably heard our names mentioned in many different discourses, but now you actually see what we look like. We're very conscious that we want this video to be about us discussing with you what's been going on really since before summer up to Christmas 2022 with regards to the Archdiocese's proposal on academization. So what we want to do in this session is really just fill you in on our background about why we're here, why we're having those conversations, and then talk you through the steps of what's going on. And we hope you'll find this a useful tool. We would love to be able to come to all the schools and speak to all the staff, but unfortunately there's only 2 of us, so your best bet, I'm afraid, is just listening to us at this stage. However, as we move forward with the process, we will be endeavouring to host meetings and also keep updating our website with up-to-date information for you about what is happening in this process. So if you are still with us and still alive, we'll begin. So why is the Archdiocese thinking about academization? Why now? Well, I think it's important to say that what we're about is about our Catholic schools. And I think we have to go back to really the essence of why we have our Catholic schools. And it's to assist in the mission of making Christ known to all people. That's not a surprise to anybody watching this. Our job is to assist parents who are the primary educators of our children in helping them to come to knowledge of God and in their religious formation. And we are at service, all of us in our schools are at service to our local church, to the Archdiocese, the parish and Christian home. And also, our schools are about being a service to society. You know, we are creating young men and women who will be citizens of the future, but also are going to be sons and daughters of God. And our duty is to ensure that they get the best quality Catholic education in order for them to do so. So that's kind of a given. We know that the bishops themselves have said to us that we are working towards what we call the common good. And the common good is endeavouring to ensure that all are treated equally, all are treated fairly, and all have the opportunities to succeed in our society today. And those principles work really along the lines of subsidiarity, which means that we have to make decisions that are taken as close to the grassroots as possible. And this will be relevant when we talk about our schools moving forward. Solidarity. We are all responsible for each other. So our schools are not in isolation. We, by nature, don't have a situation in the Archdiocese where our schools work on their own and they don't work with other schools. There's always been a history of us working together, but it's ensuring that we continue that as well. We are about promoting the principle of community cohesion. So working with our society, working within our society and working with local partners to ensure that we're creating schools for the future. But the bishops are very clear that we're also about working towards the wider community and working in partnership with other schools for the benefit of all children in society. And I think that's important that we acknowledge that. So thinking about that, we are in a position where we have to think about what is best for the future of Catholic education in the Archdiocese. Our schools are a tremendous success story, but it's also a time of great change in education. Mind you, it does seem like I say that probably every year, but it is at this moment in time. For us as the Archdiocese, we have to consider what steps we need to take to ensure that we continue with Catholic education in the Archdiocese. So what I mean by that is, not now, but it's looking about what our Catholic schools will look like in 20 to 30 years' time. So in a sense, we want to continue the journey that we've been on with Catholic education and make it better. But it has to be also considered we have to think that some of our schools in particular are vulnerable at this moment in time for many different reasons. Some schools may be vulnerable by nature of grades that they've got from the dreaded Ofsted. Some schools may be vulnerable by nature of their finances, financial demands and pressures. Some schools are also vulnerable by nature of their population and admissions. And currently, we as an archdiocese will work with the local authorities who ultimately have responsibility as well for their schools. So how do we manage this? How do we ensure that our schools remain Catholic, remain committed to the community without being vulnerable as well? And so the time was right for us to have this discussion about academization. And it is, in the past, it's fair to say, been a word that's created many different opinions and many different comments. And I've said to the heads and chairs that I've already met that, if I may be frank, there have been bad practices out there. And so it's essential that whatever we decide to do has to be one that fits the view of the Archdiocese, the views of the local community, and the views of all the people in whom we serve. And so we were tasked as officers of the Archdiocese to launch a consultation strategy on this, which is what we've been doing for the last few months. Seems like ages, to be honest with you. But we are very, very clear that academies, we believe, are here to stay. We believe that this is the model in which the DFE are working towards. Now, you will know recently, as I'm talking to you in December 2022, that the schools bill, which had academization and trust models at the heart of it, has been cancelled. But we know from the DFE that they see the trust model of working together as being the way forward for its schools. So if that's the case, how can we then ensure that we keep Catholic education safe in all our schools? How can we ensure that we support our school staff and leaders in running their schools? And how can we provide the best security for our Catholic schools? And so with that in mind, really, it was time for us to look at academization and what academization was about. But there's been a lot of, I think, misinformation out there about it. And it's a topic that does create a lot of misinformation. So I just wanted to say to you, as members of staff watching this, at this stage, we are about creating a strategy. We are not about whether your school should academize at this stage. You couldn't make that decision at this time because you don't have the information. So I would like to be clear to everybody. We are making it certain for people to understand that schools will not be forced to become academies. As you know, there are a number of schools who may fall into a category, which obviously have been inadequate, who will have an academy order on them. They will have to academize, and we will do everything we can to support them as they move forward in that journey. But for those schools who are not in that position, we are saying it is a decision for the governing body to make. So there will be no diktat from the Archbishop and the Archdiocese about whether all its schools should academize. So we've got to ensure that if we've agreed that we have to ensure that those of you who are in voluntary aided schools will continue to get the same level of support as those who may academize. But the reality is many of our schools have already expressed an interest in exploring the idea of academization. And their reasons have been many different reasons, but mainly because of securing the future of their schools. We know that there's going to be more academization. We know that currently the government's now rule is that those schools who are on more than one RI judgment could be susceptible to an academy order. And we would not be meeting the needs of our schools if we didn't have a policy or a strategy to enable and help those schools in those positions. Hence why we are where we are today. So just again to clarify, we wanted to say that it is the governing body's decision, but you will need an awful lot more of information for our governors before they make this decision. We are in December 2022 purely talking to the trustees about ensuring that we have a strategy in place. And then there is next steps, which Chris will allude to later on. But in our archdiocese strategy, there are certain things that we have to hold to be consistent. And those are that there has to be an identified CMAT, Catholic Multi-Academy Trust for Schools, to join. There has to be consistency of legal structures across the whole thing of academies. So what I mean by that is, so if you are in one academy, you will still have the same terms and conditions as other people in other academies. We can't have inconsistency of practices from our Catholic multi-academy trusts. There has to be common principles, there has to be common safeguards, and there has to be continued engagement with school leaders, staff, and governors. We are not creating a corporate model, we are creating an archdiocesan model that has the Catholic ethos, its mission, at the heart of everything that we do. But you will appreciate there's an awful lot of things to be unpicked before we're in a position to even consider which schools will academise, hence this update to you. So you've listened to me quite a length of time now, so it might be nice to hear from somebody else. So I'll pass you over to Chris, who will be taking responsibility for the academization strategy as we move forward in the new year. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Joan. The strategy that we propose to put to the Archdiocesan trustees later this month will set out proposals to create 12 Catholic multi-academy trusts, or CMATs, across the Archdiocese. And as Joan has just said, they will operate on common principles which will be consistent across all of the CMAT structures. So what I wanted to do is just to talk through a number of the key operating principles that will govern how our CMATs will operate moving forward. Firstly, and to reiterate, and I think it's worthy of reiteration, we've said a couple of times already, that schools will not be forced to become academies by the Archdiocese. The only schools that will be required to become academies are those schools that have directive academy orders issued to them by the Department for Education. They are, by definition, relatively few in numbers. So for the vast majority of you watching this, there will be no expectation that your school becomes an academy. But moving on to some other key operating principles for our CMATs. All staff within our CMATs will benefit from continuation of employment. So what I mean by that is at the point at which a school moves from being a local authority maintained school to an academy, the body who employs staff changes. So as a maintained school, staff are employed by the governing body. For an academy, staff are employed by the multi-academy trust. However, in the process of changing employer, there will be no interruption to service history, continuation of service for staff. So that means there are no difficulties with length of service, pensions, etc. Academies in our CMATs will have head teachers. Might sound like a strange thing to say, but multi-academy trusts across the country are not necessarily required to have head teachers for each of their schools. Our CMATs will. Furthermore, every multi-academy trust has to have a chief executive officer or a CEO. For the CEOs of our Catholic multi-academy trusts, they will not have the power of direction to move staff from one school to another within the multi-academy trust. So at the point at which a school chooses to join a multi-academy trust, the contracts of employment for staff will state that they are employed by the multi-academy trust, as they are the employer, as I mentioned a few moments ago. But contracts, individual staff contracts, will also state the individual's school of employment and place of work, and that will be a named individual school. A CEO in any of our MATs will not have the power to direct staff in any one school to go and work for a period of time in another school in the same multi-academy trust. Again, we recognise that for some multi-academy trusts, that's a system that they use and perhaps works very well for them. But in terms of our deliberations on this, and also the information that we had back from the consultation period that we ran earlier this year, that's something that our schools do not want to happen. And we agree, and we will therefore be making sure that our CMATs operate without that power for the Chief Executive Officer. Equally, for schools, there will not be a common curriculum delivered across every academy in a multi-academy trust. We recognise that individual schools have tailored curricula that are there to best support the children that you care for and educate in your schools. We don't wish to move away from that by having a standard curriculum across all of our academies in any CMAT. So there won't be a common curriculum across our CMATs. Continuing discussions in terms of staff interest in particular, to clarify that staff terms and conditions in the CMATs that the Archdiocese set up will be as per the Green Book and, where relevant, Burgundy Book terms and conditions. And to make sure that there is consistency across the board, all of our CMATs will have the same legal structures and operating rules. And all the things that I'm talking about here, we will build into those legal structures and operating rules, which means that in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, those same CMATs can't change the rules to alter the principles that we set out at the start. If we build them into the legal structures, it gives you protection now and into the future that the things that we're establishing at this point continue to be the case in the years ahead. There are another grouping of operating principles which I'd just like to briefly continue to run through. In terms of governance, multi-academy trusts are not required to have local governing bodies or local governing boards. We have said from the outset, and our schools have told us very clearly in our consultation phase, that it is appropriate that we have and retain local governing boards for all of our schools, whether they are maintained schools or academies. So any Catholic school in the Archdiocese becoming an academy will still have a local governing board. And that local governing board will have staff representation on it. As a default position, a head teacher would always be part of that local governing board, but we're also saying that in the structure of those local governing boards there would also be a staff representative on there, as there currently is for schools that are local authority maintained schools. In terms of school budgets, we're very clear that our CMATs will operate a principle that schools will manage their own school-specific budgets. So again, to give some examples of what might happen in multi-academy trusts elsewhere, there is a principle out there in multi-academy trusts where schools can pool their budgets into a single pot within the multi-academy trust, and then there is a redistribution mechanism within that multi-academy trusts to then pass back, based on that redistribution mechanism, a budget for each individual school within the multi-academy trust. That's not the model that we're looking to set up in our new CMATs, and our new CMATs will be set up with schools having individual budgets, individual bank accounts, and schools will receive their funding directly from the Department for Education for implementation in their individual schools. Furthermore, on budgets, at the point of transfer from becoming a maintained school to an academy school, in terms of the current rules and regulations set out by the Department for Education, schools would retain budgets on transfer. And that applies whether or not you're a school converting with a deficit budget or a school converting with a surplus budget. Either way, you take that position with you from maintained status into academy status. And those schools that transfer with a surplus budget, if you're lucky enough to be in that particular situation, the MAT cannot then take that surplus from you and redistribute it anywhere else. The only slight exception to that rule are schools that have directive academy orders, and we've mentioned already they are few in number. And for schools with directive academy orders that convert with a deficit budget, on conversion that deficit is retained by the local authority. So it's not wiped, it has to be picked up by a particular body, and in those very limited circumstances it's the local authority that retains the school deficit budget. But by and large, school budgets move from maintained status to academy status as they are at the point of conversion. Moving away from finance, one of the things that we're very keen to do is to make sure that our CMATs provide additionality. And one of the ways that that happens is to make sure that we don't put in place things that prevent you continuing with existing collaborations, networks, partnerships that you already have. So we know that lots of our schools across the Archdiocese have brilliant networks and partnerships in place, perhaps with schools in different local authorities, perhaps with schools that aren't Catholic schools. There is absolutely no reason at all that for a school becoming an academy in one of our CMATs, those networks are truncated. Indeed, to the contrary, we want to make sure that they are protected and developed further, because again, they have been developed by you and your colleagues to make sure that they are for the benefit of the children in your school. So, to be clear, existing networks will be encouraged and retained. And on that theme, and in terms of referencing joint working and collaboration, many of you will be aware of the work that is carried out through the two school improvement trusts that the Archdiocese have, known as ALPSIT and ALSIT for brevity. To be clear to you all, in our proposals, ALPSIT and ALSIT will be retained and will form a key element of the services that our CMATs can tap into and that schools can continue to use, whether or not they remain as a maintained school or become an academy. But ALPSIT and ALSIT will be retained and have the support of the Education Department in doing so. Final couple of points in terms of key operating principles for now. Admissions arrangements. Admissions arrangements will remain as at present. An example question that we hear quite a lot is a question along the lines of, if a child goes to a primary school that's an academy in a particular CMAT, will that child have to go to high school in the same CMAT? And the answer to that is no. As I've just said, admissions arrangements will remain as present, and as present, they are predicated on our parish network with high schools having partner feeder primary schools, and therefore a direct path for all children through primary phase education into secondary phase education. That doesn't need to change in an academy structure, and we're very clear that it won't change in an academy structure, and we will continue to operate in the way that we currently do. And finally, land ownership remains at present. And just to clarify, the vast majority of schools in the Archdiocese of Liverpool are under the trusteeship of the Archdiocesan trustees, and in an academy context, the buildings that are currently owned by the Archdiocesan trustees as maintained schools continue to be owned by the Archdiocesan trustees in an academy context. That's the same if you work for a school under the trusteeship of a religious order. At the moment, the order owns school buildings. That continues to be the case in an academy situation. So they are some of the key operating principles that we just wanted to reiterate, should I say. Final couple of messages really, just to kind of explain to you what we've done so far in terms of communication and what we intend to do in terms of next steps. So what we've done in recent months is that we have, as Joan mentioned at the start, we've had a period of engagement and indeed consultation on strategy documents, which you may have seen that we published during the summer term 2022. And we've continued the dialogue post the end of the consultation phase with school leaders and governors. When we published the documents back in the summer term, one of the documents that we published was a frequently asked questions document, and we're just completing an update of that document, which will be published imminently, and that will be on the Archdiocese website. And I would encourage you to take a look at that document, because it is there are plenty of frequently asked questions, and we've tried to answer them as clearly but as succinctly as we can. and hopefully that provides a useful document for you to take a look at, and may answer some of the additional questions that you might have that we've not been able to cover in this brief session today. We've also, through the consultation phase during the year, looked at the different groupings for the 12 CMATs that are proposed as part of our strategy, and we will be publishing early in the new year the updated groupings so everybody can see exactly where their school would have a home in a CMAT structure. And we've continued during the course of the year discussions on your behalf with school leaders, school governors, religious order trustees, trade unions, local authorities and other government bodies, and we will continue to do that in the months ahead. The immediate next steps as we look to the months ahead is that, as we said at the start of the meeting, we are working on presenting a academy strategy to the Archdiocesan trustees at the end of December 2022, and if the trustees approve that strategy, we will be able to publish that as a public document early in 2023. That takes us into the spring term, of course, and there are a number of things that we then intend to do in the spring term. In the event that we have a strategy that we can publish, in the spring term we intend to invite schools across the Archdiocese to submit expressions of interest, if they wish to, about exploring further the potential to become an academy. As Joan said earlier on, the choice on that is the governing bodies, but we want to give the opportunity for the first time, we've not been able to do it previously, for those schools who wish to explore it further to express an interest in doing so. And we intend to do that early in the spring term in 2023. What we're also working on as well is the opportunity to give our colleagues at our schools in the Archdiocese the opportunity to ask questions of people who currently work in other multi-academy trusts in other areas of the country, because we think that might be something that will be of interest to staff performing all different types of roles in schools, and that's something that we're looking to establish again during the spring term. We will also start to build the CMATs as individual companies, as their structures, as legal entities, and it's a fairly dry process, but it is a necessary process all the same, because for those schools who do wish to explore becoming an academy, we need to have the structures in place to be able to accommodate them. So that's a piece of work that we're looking at early in 2023. And on the back of the expressions of interest that we may receive from schools interested in taking the discussions further forward, we will obviously be working with those schools to look at how those discussions can be structured, how they can be timetabled, how they can make sure that they involve all elements of a school community, which of course includes staff as a central element to it. So to conclude, really just to focus on our commitment to ongoing engagement. We hope that you've found this information session useful and interesting, and we will continue to find the best ways we possibly can to communicate information to staff at schools across the Archdiocese. We are already committed to termly feedback to school leaders, to staff, to governors, and we will consider the best ways to do that. We're open to your ideas on how to do that as well. We already have regular engagement with trade union colleagues, and we will continue to do that. And of course, on the back of anything that we've said today, if you have questions, you're very welcome to raise them with your head teacher, your governors, your trade union representatives, and us here at the Archdiocese. All of those bodies will be able to support you and represent you appropriately. And as I've already said, moving forward as part of that ongoing engagement and indeed consultation, we will have school-specific discussions as appropriate, and we will continue to develop our strategy documents as well, including the aforementioned frequently asked questions, We will look to utilise the Archdiocese website to post the documents, so you'll be able to have direct access in a very public environment to all of the documents as we update them and as we develop them. All I would say in conclusion is that it's difficult to have a two-way conversation in a situation like this, but we are very open to having a two-way dialogue. There is an email address which I shall leave you with, which gives you direct access to us here at the Archdiocese. And if you have any questions about our strategy, about your individual school, about your own personal circumstances, any questions that you would wish us to respond to, we're quite happy to do so. And that email address is academyconsultation, all one word, at rcaol.org.uk.
So thank you very much for watching this video today. It's new territory for us, so we hope we've passed the test. We're not sure we're going to make it as news anchors yet, but you never know. There might be another career. All we ask is that you really just have the opportunity now to have a look at what is out there with regards to this consultation strategy and our next steps moving forward. If you go to the diocesan website, you will see regular updates from us on the academization agenda. Anything you need, you will find there. I do emphasise what Chris has said about the frequently asked questions. That will be very much a live document. So if you've got questions that you feel aren't covered in that document, would you please also email us and let us know? Because what we want to do is make that as live as possible to deal with queries and questions that you may have. This is a big journey, and like anything with change, for some of us, we can feel very comfortable about it, and some of us can feel a bit worried about it, and we do understand and take those attitudes into consideration. I go back to what we said at the beginning. Our Catholic schools are a success story in this Archdiocese, and that's thanks to you. That's thanks to the work that you do, your commitment and your dedication and your trust in your school leaders and in ourselves and the work that we do. And we know so much of what we're talking about is trust again. So we ask you just to keep us in mind as well as we endeavour to create something that meets the needs of our Archdiocese. Because with this model of academization, there isn't one size fits all. So we're going to be doing something very different from the rest of the country that meets the needs of our Archdiocese. And I really want to assure you of that as we move forward. So please get in touch, keep watching the videos. We might get the hang of it second time round. I'm hoping we do, but we look forward to being in touch with you soon. Thank you.